Timothy Leary was one of the great pioneers of the evolution of consciousness throughout the 1960s and 1970s. A former Harvard professor, he explored the altering of one's perceptions through the use of LSD. He was fired from Harvard and took to the road, visiting dozens of college campuses, appearing on endless radio and television shows, describing his journeys with the chemical. He popularized the term turn on, tune in, drop out. His life became tumultuous, of course, involving much criticism, scorn, and confusion. He was arrested, served time in prison, escaped from prison, fled to Algeria, then to Switzerland. He also ran for governor of California. Somewhere along the journey, he became my neighbor in Los Angeles, and we spent many an intriguing evening together. I would also interview him frequently on my various radio shows. One day he asked if I would collaborate with him on a proposed autobiography. We sat together for hours at my home, taping material for a book that was never to be published. Here are some samples of my conversations with Timothy Leary.
Let's begin just by going through a brief chronology, very brief chronology of what things have been like for you for the past couple of years. So we can begin pretty much around the time that you got out of jail up till today. But for purposes of review, for people who are not all that aware of the circumstances, how long did the incarceration last?
I was in prison for 44 months, and I was in exile for about over 2 years, so altogether it came to over 6 years of prison or fugitive.
And the specific reason why you were in prison for 44 months, the charge?
I was in for possession of 2 roaches which had been planted in my car by a cop who was subsequently promoted.
Is he currently a police officer in Los Angeles?
Orange County.
In Orange County. Have you ever had any communication directly or indirectly with that officer?
No.
Because so much of your life had to be relegated to that kind of incarceration, did you ever, now that you are free, think about calling him up and expressing your thoughts or having anything to say to him?
Would never occur to me. I've, in my profession, I have to deal with or encounter agents of the other side 10 a week, so that I couldn't possibly go back and discuss details. I certainly have no feelings one way or another about it. I admire those that play their game well. But, I don't look past. I spend most of my time in the future. The future is so complicated and it's so exciting. And to build the future, to fabricate the future, which is my job, requires carpentry, full-time attention to the step-by-step actions which are going to make the future that I want to have happen. So that I learn from the past, I'm particularly alert to repeating a mistake, to falling into the same trap. But I have very little interest in the past, and I have no emotion, certainly no bitterness or resentment or complaint, because number one, we won, and it would be unsportsmanlike now that we're the establishment, that we're the champions of the world, to complain or kvetch or be upset about the fact that the game was a little rough at earlier stages.
And even during the incarceration itself, you had no feelings of bitterness or dislike towards the people who restricted your movement, restricted your physical freedom?
a source of continual amazement and amusement to me, Elliot, to realize that most people think that I was a victim or that I was a martyr. And I can see that in their framework, particularly since we live in a Judeo-Christian society, when we expect good to be crucified, that this is the myth that people like to have about me. But the facts are that I was always totally engaged and totally interested and fascinated in the all the events that occurred to me during this period of incarceration and being a fugitive, Algeria with Cleaver, gangsters in Switzerland and so forth. It was just such an incredibly fascinating B-movie, and it all seemed historically inevitable and necessary that I had to play out these parts. That no, I never. One always has regrets about aesthetics. Yes, there are a lot of aesthetic mistakes I wouldn't have repeated, but the major dimensions of the scenario of the 60s and 70s was inevitable, had to be done, someone had to do it, and I just felt honored, for example, that I was the number one victim of the Nixon-Agnew narcotic department purge. I thought there was a flattery.
Interesting quote when you say that you were honored by that role. Talk to us a bit about that. Why were you honored by the fact that you were singled out as the one to be gotten for the consciousness?
Well, number one, I'm convinced that everything that happens is genetically predetermined and historically predictable, inevitable. Now, heroes or villains or highly visible stars, images, are needed to personalize what was going on. Now, what happened in the 60s was so complicated when you had something like 40 million people suddenly discovering buttons in their own brain and getting control of their own neurology and pressing these new circuits into activation. What was going on was happening so fast, and it was also so variable, because each person found different buttons to push. Every time anyone got high in the 60s, they uncovered a highly unique reality within. So that, and it was so unexpected to the establishment and to the law enforcement people and to the philosophers and to the literary mafia that was running the country, that they had to personalize what was going on. So they selected certain people to personalize. I was selected to personalize drugs. And I found it very amusing when I'd be passed around. I was in 29 jails and prisons, and I'd be transferred from one to another. Sometimes I'd be thrown in a county jail or thrown in a, for lunch or en route and so forth. And as soon as I'd be brought into a jail or prison, shackled and handcuffed, the cops there would, all get together and they'd murmur, and then I'd see my guards would say, drugs, oh yeah, drugs. Well, I think to have the label of being the person that represented the drug culture, or that represented the concept that you could change your mind or expand your consciousness or write a new script because of drugs, that's an honor. I mean, really, that goes down with like who invented the wheel or who invented the Gutenberg press. Now, I don't deserve that honor. I didn't invent drugs. I just rode the wave with everybody else. So I have no illusions about the fact that I'm not responsible for anything. But I do see that I was the one selected to personalize both on the positive side, the millions of people who had all sorts of illusions about how good I was in their reality bubble, and then of course the people who had to denounce me as a devil. Of course I was neither. But I find this to be a fascinating position to be in, and I urge those of you that leave this planet and travel around the galaxy visiting primitive planets, if you ever get a chance in your as an evolutionary agent to play the role of drug prophet, take it. I mean,
should we insert or should we not insert? I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but when you talk about drugs, when you talk about dope, are you not talking primarily about LSD and hallucinogenics and marijuana and consciousness expansion drugs, as opposed to heroin, morphine, barbiturates, amphetamine?
The good drugs as opposed to the bad drugs?
Do you make a distinction, or
No.
are any drugs that alter?
No. Number one, I'm not that interested in drugs. I'm interested in the brain. I'm interested in the brain. Drugs are simply locomotions, or they're vehicles, or transportation devices that get you around your own brain. They move you inside, internally. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in exploring the endless inner spaces. Neurological geography is my fascination. But drugs simply allow you to move from one place in your head to another. Now, the paradox is, see, it doesn't do any good if you take a primitive moron and you put them in a jet plane and you fly them to Rome or fly them to Athens or fly them to Hollywood. They're just not going to understand what's going on there. They'll complain because they can't get bourbon whiskey or they can't get McDonald's hamburgers in the pyramids. So that drugs can only take you places that you already know how to go, to quote, is that the Eagles?
Yes.
Yeah. And doesn't do any good. It's wasted. All drugs are wasted on people that once they get to these fabulous places in their own head, they're complaining because they don't speak English in the lower cerebellum.
It's interesting to me, though, that you do not make distinctions between, quote, good drugs, bad drugs, upper drugs, downer drugs. That anything...
Yes, you've changed. Good and bad, I don't. We're certainly beyond good and evil at this point. And obviously, heroin has a certain function, or the DNA code wouldn't have geared our brains to respond to heroin. Heroin is, without question, the drug of choice for anyone who's in intractable pain or is terminally ill. Mm-hmm. And it was Alsop, the conservative...
Yes.
Was it Joseph? No, it was his brother.
Stuart
Alpert, yeah. He was one of my leading enemies for years. He represented the CIA establishment right down the line until he got terminal cancer and was in pain. Suddenly he started writing columns about how great heroin was. Not acid, not simple grass. And he was right, that there's a certain time when... so I do make the distinction between up and down and fast and slow. And if you want to go slow or bog down in some vegetative swamp and wrap yourself up into a silken cocoon of isolation, heroin's the way to do it. I don't like heroin personally, but...
Have you tried it?
Yep.
What's that like? What does it feel like, for the benefit of those of us who have never tried it?
Well, I've always objected to generalizing. I'm a highly unique nervous system because I've been studying the brain. I've been studying psychology for 35 years. I do nothing 24 hours a day except try and figure out how to get smarter, so that my reaction to a drug is very different from anybody else's, and everybody's reaction to a drug is pretty different. So that, I had the occasion once when I was out of this country to, just kind of accidental, there was some heroin around. I thought this is the time to try it out, and I got to that point where I could feel the invitation in my cells, and I could see that it'd be very easy to get addicted. At that point, I totally stopped it because it simply wasn't worth it. And I really studied heroin users, and I find that they're dumb, basically dumb, and that they get bad-tempered, and they're totally unpleasant to be around, and there's nobody home really to talk to when you're dealing with a heroin addict. So I think it's like any other. Highly self-directed narcissistic mirror experience. There's just no fun for self or others in heroin.
Was that the way your experience was with it too? Was that the reaction that you had to it? I know yours is unique.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious as to how it, what kind of impact it had upon you, if any.
Well, the first time I took heroin, I found it pleasant, just to touch your skin, have your skin go off in explosions of pleasure, and so forth. But the second or third time was simply a way of cooling out and going to sleep.
And that was it, as far as your experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to you just a little bit longer about drugs and then leave it, because that's certainly yesterday's papers in your life. In 1966, you did an interview with Playboy magazine. In 1966, the interviewer asked, as his second question, how many times you had taken LSD. And in 1966, you told Playboy magazine 311 times.
With 311 and a half.
311 and a half. And the world was quite taken back by that at the time.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yes. That was considerably racy.
Was that right?
Oh, yeah. That was a shocking statistic. in your life, up to now, 10 years later, about how many experiences do you think you've had with LSD?
Well, I always feel that's like asking somebody, how many times have you made love? You know, and, well, number one, if anyone can answer that question, I always laugh. I mean, well, I've made love to 579 women in my life. Good God, I mean...
one can say with my wife, we usually have sex 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And one could add up the total.
Yeah.
I mean, are we talking about over 1,000 experiences? Beyond that, less than that?
Oh, I'd say somewhere between 300 and 1,000.
Somewhere between 300 and 1,000.
Yeah.
Was the last one as personally interesting to you as the 311th that you had in 1966? The purpose of all these questions, without getting into numbers, is I'm just trying to figure out, as of today, March 1978, has that experience kind of worn thin, or do you still find it an enormous vehicle for self-discovery for you to the same degree as you did 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, we're sure we're all aware of the fact that to take LSD or to smoke grass in 1978 is very different from doing it in 1960. Because there was that sense of discovery. In 1960-61, you were an explorer, literally out on the frontier, the neurological frontier of the human species. Literally experienced for the first time an experimental mysticism that only the rare Buddhas and Swamis had talked about in the past. So that this was a bombshell. And everyone was rushing around, having this experience and running back home and telling their friends about how they discovered God or the devil. Well, the result of 7 million people taking LSD, that's FDA or DEA statistics. And of course these 7 million included like 3 million of people that shouldn't have done it, who were too spaced out to begin with, but also included 3 million people who were the smartest, most courageous, most alert of our species, who then turned around and transmitted what they learned in poems, song, and just basic lifestyle. So that now, a kid that's born today in a reasonably sophisticated environment is born into a world which is lysergicized to a great extent. So that nobody can get now the impact from LSD that you got in the early 60s. It's like the first time anyone flew a plane right after this began to change everyone. I mean, it was a thrill. Now, we log several thousand or almost 100,000 miles a year in airplanes.
So it's not the drug that's changed, it's the times that it's changed.
Yeah. There's now, if you were to take acid for the first time and come back talking about your revelations, everyone will say, yeah, what's new? We all know that now. Literally, the human species, or that growing small percentage of the human species that keeps evolution moving, has been totally transformed by the drug consciousness culture of the 60s, and we're going on from there.
So for you personally, what I gather from your response to my initial question is no, it's not the same, and it's certainly...
Well, I found the last time I was using LSD a great deal was in Switzerland before I left to go to Afghanistan, and I was taking a lot of LSD, and it was like washing the windows of your car. So that I would be sure I would take it simply to be more alert and to look back on the last 2 or 3 days and see, because you're always off course, little mistakes, inertia, repetitious. And so I wasn't discovering the meaning of the universe. Well, I do that every minute anyway. I don't need drugs to do that. But I would use LSD simply to clean the lenses a little bit, and to say, oh, did I really say that last night? That was the revelation. Simply because, that's enough.
So it would be fair to say that you now believe, for you personally, and perhaps for society in general, that we are now in a post-drug society, a post-LSD period. Is LSD obsolete?
Nothing's obsolete. The great lesson of evolution is this. And when I talk about evolution, I'm talking about evolution of the brain, because that's the center of our reality. DNA never throws anything away. You have an amoeba brain, and on top of that, DNA builds a fish brain. On top of that, DNA builds an amphibian brain. On top of that, it builds a wiry 4-foot mammalian brain. Then it builds a monkey brain, and then it builds a caveman or woman brain. So, and we have all these brains still going. We use these brains from second to second and day to day. But I'm using my LSD brain a lot. I use it, hours a day, particularly in aesthetic and erotic, and the deeper my LSD brain is there, it's been activated. I don't have to open that room with the drug because I'm in it a lot. I can't conceive of anybody operating as an intelligent person in the 20th century who doesn't have hasn't opened their LSD brain and has access to it and uses it. You don't have to get at the key and go through the whole. You can just push the door through the use of rituals that can get you back to that room.
So if I was to say I happen to have a tab here of window pane,
Yeah.
your reaction to it would be basically one of indifference right now.
Elliot, I can't answer that question. Just see, I don't want to be, and every interview I have wants to get me back to the 1960s, where I'm coming out endorsing LSD.
Mm-hmm.
And number one, it's a why is that? See,
Why?
I found in the 60s, every interviewer, towards the end of the 60s anyway, was trying to get me to say I didn't use LSD anymore, or LSD was bad. Because that would be news.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if I smell?
No, go ahead.
I must say this. Again, we're getting into the question of image. Now, I'm pleased today and amused that when I meet somebody, say a stranger, who knows who I am, say, "Oh, I hear you're into space now," and I smile and I say, "Well, that's the image I want to encourage. Actually, I'm beyond that, but I'm glad that you think I'm into space migration, space colonization, space industrialization, power satellites in space, rockets, Star Wars." Right, because that's the image that I've deliberately, sincerely do feel that outer space follows inner space. But I'm through that. Now, to go back now to the LSD drug image, I will tell you this. My neurology is such that pleasure, ecstasy, particularly, and revelation, particularly as opened up and stimulated and activated by drugs, has always been a duty for me. So that, far from taking drugs as a kick, I always would try to postpone taking LSD or postpone making love or something like that. And fortunately, I always surrounded myself with intelligent people who really played on my guilt and forced me to take LSD. So that, in a funny way, I'm wired in such a way. Most people are wired in such a way that they feel guilty about sex or pleasure. I'm wired the other way. I'm so fascinated by my own mind and what goes on in my own mind. I literally am light years ahead. I'm a time traveler. I'm back down in the 20th century, literally, in my own reality, dealing with primitive primate apes. See, so I'm going around so that to get back to do my own work, like to get back in my own room and start really working on some of these problems and figuring out how to translate DNA, quantum physics into the language of domesticated primates who speak English. See, that fascinates me as a problem. So that I literally feel I've always felt guilty. I didn't take more LSD. So now It's strange. That,
Right.
see, that's why I find it a little hard to I have to explain this as background so that people won't misunderstand. I find also that I haven't made love enough. I've lived a very active life, but I would say I feel guilty that I haven't made love 1,000 times more than I did, and gotten high 1,000 times more. If I were to do it all over again, I would get high and make love 1,000 times more. And then, ironically enough, statistically, I've taken more drugs than anybody else and probably made love as much. But you can only speak from your own subjective point of view. So that I remember. Well, I'm always amused by the Oriental gurus who are always trying to quiet their mind and to turn off their lust. And I would say, I want more lust. I want my mind to go faster. Richard Alpert, Baba Ramdas, goes around saying his mind is a drunken monkey, and he does all these things to quiet his mind. Well, my mind isn't a drunken monkey. My mind is the most highly calibrated, most complex instrument probably this planet has ever seen. So I don't want to turn off my mind. I want to give it more energy. In the same way about lust and desire and greed, I don't have enough of it, and I want more of it. And I remember once I was in Vacaville prison with one of the leaders of the Black Panthers. He came up to me and says, "Hey man, how do you meditate here? I see you with your girlfriend or your wife in the visiting room, and what like that. How do you control your lust?" And he said he's meditating to control his lust. And I say, "Loan me some. I'll take all your lust. I'll take all your greed. I'll take all your extra drugs."
I understand. And also understand that you can't interview John Lennon without asking a question or two about what the Beatles were like, and it's difficult, to interview you without some reference to, one of the many, many identities that people have of you, one of the many, many impressions, and that's the only reason for this drug stuff. I'll just ask you one or two more questions about it and then move on to the next chapter in the Odyssey. As a matter of fact, I think I can turn the tape over now.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the end of side one, tape one.
Yeah, I like